EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome back to Football 24/7. He's John McMullen, and I'm your guy, Tone DeShields II. First and foremost, before we get too deep into the content, you guys, you know what to do. Smash that like button. Make sure you guys are subscribed to the JAKIB Sports YouTube channel, and also make sure you guys are commenting below, especially if you're watching this after the fact. We appreciate all people who watch it live, and if you're watching this on your own time, because that's where we are right now. We're in the digital age. Watch what you want on your own time. Do as you please. And listen, we got what you need, you guys. And also on top of that, if you want more from John McMullen, if you're an avid reader of his content, you know where to find him. You can find him on sportsillustrated.com. That's SI.com. But also you can find him on JAKIBsports.com. JAKIB Sports.com. Now, John, now that I've gotten the pleasantries out of the way, how are you doing today, my friend?
Doing well. We're nearing the stretch, Tone DeShields. We had a couple practices over the weekend. We saved that for you until today, people down the shore and all that kind of stuff. And then tomorrow, joint practice with the Indianapolis Colts, technically the last training camp practice of the year, the last completely open practice of the year for reporters. So then the Eagles can really get to work behind closed doors. I think that's what they're waiting for.
Yeah, absolutely. We haven't really seen too many we haven't seen too much nuance with this team, especially in the preseason. But I mean, what team is really showing you all they can do, right? But I'm curious to know, over the weekend, like you said, 2 practices back-to-back, Saturday and Sunday. I'm curious to know, what were some of your observations over the weekend? What stood out to you on the offensive side of the ball, the defensive side, special teams, so on and so forth?
Well, I think the biggest story was on Saturday. The Eagles showed up for practice after the preseason game. And all the injuries, there were a number of low-level roster moves, the most notable being Zach McPherson being waived injured. All those guys, Tyree Cleveland, Noah Ellis, and Zach, cleared waivers, so they revert to the Eagles IR list. So that's sort of some of the bookkeeping. But, the surprising thing was Justin Evans showing up and getting the vast majority of the first-team reps at safety opposite Reed Blankenship. First time, that would have been the 13th practice of the summer open to reporters. First time Justin Evans got the majority of the first team reps. And on Sunday, Sean Desai spoke. So that was the first question. And it was asked by me. And the first 4 questions were asked about the safety position as a whole. And he kept saying, that's the plan. That's the plan. I have a very hard time believing the Eagles came into the summer and said, we're going to rotate Terrell Edmonds. We're going to rotate Kayvon Wallace. We're going to rotate Sidney Brown. And then on day 13, we're going to put in Justin Evans. I mean, that doesn't hold water, as they say. So to me, it indicates continued uncertainty. And just as you're whittling, this is when you're supposed to whittle things down.
Right.
Cutdown day is a week from tomorrow. That's the cutdown day to 53. This is supposed to be when you're whittling things down, not expanding the search. So I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. By Sunday, it was a little back to normal. Terrell Edmonds got most of the first team reps, but all four, Edmonds, Kayvon Wallace, Justin Evans, Sidney Brown got some first team reps. So that to me was the most interesting thing over the weekend.
Really quickly, John, it's funny you say that. I was reading your article, right, on SI.com, and you had a quote that really stood out to me. You said, there's competition, and then there's confusion. There's open-mindedness, and then there's this, and then there's indecision. Walk me through, what went through your mind as you were writing this article. And, for obvious reasons, like you said, they're clearly doing a lot of movement with that safety position next to Reed Blankenship. And it doesn't really show that anyone's really standing out, or it's not really showing that there's anyone back there that they trust outside of Reed. But walk me through how this piece of yours came to be.
Well, it's because, and a lot of it has to do with Reed, because, I closed that same piece pointing out the very existence of Reed Blankenship tells you somebody can seize the position. I mean, Reed's been there from day one. He's taken every first team rep when he's out there at the other safety position. So this hemming and hawing at the second safety position that the Eagles say is planned. Come on, the existence of Reed Blankenship proves it isn't planned. If someone takes the position, someone takes the position, and that's what you want. And the Eagles obviously haven't gotten that, and we're at August 21st. Now, you can look to last year, the same thing. Anthony Harris was the starter up to August 30th. And then when they made the trade for C.J. Gardner-Johnson, he was off the team. He was off the 53-man roster, eventually brought back on the practice squad, but you get the point.
Right.
This is not – the fact that nobody has seized the position is not a positive development.
So what's your expectation at this point, right? Like you said, GJ was brought in on August 30th. So this Eagles team, Harry Roseman, has typically never really left a stone unturned, maybe when it comes to the linebacker position. But for the most part, he always seems to keep his eyes and ears close to the waiver wire. So are there any players that maybe you noticed over the past few weeks that maybe the Eagles can probably point to probably add to this safety room? Or as a matter of fact, I'll put it to you this way. Are there any players who are currently on the roster right now at safety position who you think don't really have a shot in the dark at this starting role next to Reed Blankenship?
Well, I think Kayvon is fallen back a little bit. I think it's really a 3-man race between Terrell Edmonds, Justin Evans, Sidney Brown. Justin Evans being the sort of the wild card. I think, he's regarded as more of a coverage player, and that's typically what the Big Fangio defense wants in safeties, what C.J. Gardner-Johnson was and is. Sidney Brown's more of a box safety. Terrell Edmonds more of a box safety, at least in the case of their previous existences. Terrell in Pittsburgh, Sidney in college at Illinois. So they're kind of learning how to play post safety. So I think that factors into it. Ultimately, they want to get to Sidney Brown. We all know that. How quickly can they get there? I don't know. Week 1 might be a little bit iffy, but I've said there's some merit to throwing him into the deep end of the pool and saying, "Go swim, young man," and understanding he'll make some mistakes, but we talk about startup costs all the time. That would be the time. If you look at their schedule, you can probably afford some mistakes and still beat some of those teams early on the schedule, and maybe later you can't afford those mistakes. So maybe you want to get them out of the way. You never want to be uncertain, but the ironic thing is, I think they're pretty deep at safety. I think they have a lot of good backup safeties. The problem is, do they have good starting safeties? That I don't know.
Yeah, it's funny because you have so many guys that are, like you said, they're at best maybe backup safeties, and you got some guys back there who are relatively unproven. A guy like Reed Blankenship showed you some things in his rookie year, but still, like, what's his ceiling per se, right? How successful can he really be? And then you got a guy in Sidney Brown who's sort of a project a little bit, like you said, sink or swim. Then you got a guy in Justin Evans who's been around the league a little bit, battled injuries, but has kind of fallen out of favor in the NFL. He's trying to redeem himself. Terrell Edmonds was in a situation with the Pittsburgh Steelers, was a 4-year, 5-year starter there, fell out of favor. Now he's in Philadelphia. So it's a lot of guys. And then Kevon Wallace, right? He's been on this team for 3 or 4 years. I believe he's in a contract year. He has a lot riding on the season as well. So you have a lot of guys who are really battling for a big situation, for a big paycheck. And you would like to think that kind of circumstance will kind of the cream will rise at the top. But obviously, Sean Desai and those guys, they've been rotating so many different guys. No one's clearly been able to separate themselves.
Yeah, man. You can also look at it from the linebacker position. Zach Cunningham's only been here for a week and a half or whatever.
But he's shown you a lot already.
Yeah, and he separated himself. He's sort of taken the lead. So, the fact that you started training camp in late July and you're now here and we're into late August and you're trying to sell that, oh, this was the plan. I mean, nobody's buying that. What happened is nobody's standing out. And, Jody brought up an interesting point this morning on Birds 365. He said the Eagles are so obsessed with competitive advantage. Like I said, I personally, and they are, and Nick Sirianni, they could be waiting for us to leave. And by us, I mean the reporters. And bang, Terrell Edmonds is the starting safety.
Oh, so Jody's implying they've already really made their decision.
Yeah,
they're just waiting for you guys to kind of,
for competitive advantage standpoints.
Okay,
but
all right.
But the reason I'm not buying that is,
like you said in your article, watch what they do, not what they say.
Yeah, the reason Zach Cunningham, they're not hiding that. Cam Jurgens, they're not hiding that. They might not say it, but they're not.
It's kind of hard not to hide. It's kind of hard not to hide Zach, right? I mean, that linebacker room is not the sharpest.
So they're not hiding these things at other positions where there was supposed to be competition. So, yeah, I'm still defaulting to they don't know. They don't know which way they want to go opposite Reed Blankenship. And, sometimes you just got to make a decision. And, guess what? Week 1 rolls around and insert name doesn't play well. You can play somebody else the next week, but, make a decision and get prepared. Start, getting that name prepared for the regular season.
I mean, you bring up a good point. Like, they've clearly began to make their decision at linebacker. Obviously, Nakobe Dean, they've invested a lot of time into him, and then Zach Cunningham, they brought him in, but he's already began to separate himself amongst other guys as well. That brings me to the outlook of this linebacker position with the Philadelphia Eagles, because Miles Jack decided to retire. He decided to call it a career. Walk me through what led to that. What were you seeing that may have added to him being able to make it? What made this decision easy for him? I guess I'm asking.
Well, I don't know if it's ever easy, but I think it was pretty clear he wasn't going to make the football team. So, I mean, from that standpoint, Miles, when we talked to him when he signed, he said, he had 1 foot in retirement to begin with. He admitted he wasn't sure if anybody was going to call. He admitted he was, thinking about learning a trade because he wanted to stay busy. He's made a lot of money. He doesn't have to work, but he wants to work, all that kind of stuff. Preparing for the zombie apocalypse, which is one of the all-time great quotes. So, I think he just saw that was the whole plan of how he signed them both, Zach Cunningham and Miles Jack, see if one of them has something left. And I think the Eagles might have hit it with Zach Cunningham. And, Miles is Christian Ellis was always going to be here because he's a good special teams player. And that's become even more important now that they've lost both Sean Bradley and Zach McPherson. And Nicholas Morrow's been okay.
That's funny you say Morrow hasn't. sometimes it's good when we don't hear your name. You know what I mean? Like I haven't really
Yeah.
heard his name in preseason games, and that doesn't mean he's making the best of plays, but it also means he's not making himself into a liability, right?
Yeah, he's been solid in practice as well. And there's some roster hijinks that's going to go on next Tuesday with bested veterans. He's a bested veteran, so you can kind of play the game. Moro Jomo, for instance, is in concussion protocol. You probably don't want to cut him. You probably want to go heavy on the defensive line, defensive front. Like to make things specific because they have so many good players up front.
Right.
And you can keep, say, a Jomo on the 53 and do a wink with somebody like Nick Morrow or could be Rick Lovato, the long snapper, and say, all right, Nick, we need the roster spot. We're going to bring you back. You don't have to go through waivers, so you don't have to worry about other teams plucking them. And they never leave basically the building, and you just re-sign them when you can put a Jomo on IR. Because remember, if you go on IR before the cut to 53, you're done for the season. So that's why you have to do that juggling. So if he makes the initial 53, then you can put him on IR the next day. He's only got to miss 4 games, and then you can re-sign, insert name. So you're going to see some of that as well.
Okay, yeah, a lot of moving and shaking by Harry Roseman. This linebacker position. We talked about Nicholas Morrow, and we briefly brought up Christian Ellis. He's been a presence during this preseason. He's had some plays. He has some nice series where he made an impact, be it in pass coverage, be it in sniffing out a screen pass, also in defending the run as well. He's been making some waves a little bit. Do you think there's any way Christian Ellis can make a push towards Zach Cunningham, or do you think Zach Cunningham kind of has this thing in the bag? All he has to do is just kind of maintain and tread water.
I think he's got a big lead, but I don't think the door is shut. I think, and the Eagles don't really value preseason games, so I'm not going to go there.
Right.
But if he plays well against Indianapolis tomorrow, it maybe all of a sudden Zach Cunningham kind of falls apart, not only in practices we do see, but practices we don't see.
Right.
There's a little bit of an opening, but
if you had to bet on it,
I had to bet on it, yeah, I'm going Zach Cunningham at this point.
Okay.
And he's been getting the majority of the first team reps on both Saturday and Sunday after the game, the vast majority. So Kristen's been mixing in, even Nick Morrow's been mixing in a little bit because that's how Sean Desai does it. But he's gotten the vast majority. So clearly much clearer than safety, say.
Understood. I want to jump over to the defensive line. Jalen Carter, I just keep hearing this man's name, and obviously Nolan Smith is dealing with the shoulder, and they kind of held him out, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, from practice. So they're trying to tread lightly with him. But when it comes to this defensive line, specifically Jalen Carter, what have you seen from him over the weekend that's continuing to prove why he was drafted where he was drafted?
Yeah, I mean, he's just I've talked about a lot. He's just different from a physical standpoint. I mean, he's a big guy who can move, and that's a nice combination. And he's just got a natural ability to rush the passer from inside, from the interior. Lane Johnson compared him to Geno Atkins the other day. And for those who don't know, Geno was, 4-time All-Pro, All-Decade player in Cincinnati. Just one of those guys who was really difficult to block, but he was kind of undersized. He's 6'1", 300, a little bit, actually 290. They probably gave him. He was an undersized player. Jalen Carter's got those kind of movement skills, but he's like 320. And he's taller. He's just really gifted. I mean, I've said it from day one. He's the best player in the draft. He's different. And he's tough to deal with. That's what Dallas Goedert said. Dallas said he had to block him twice, and all he said is that dude's going to be a problem. Is basically what he said. He's there's certain guys. I don't want to go Aaron Donald because Aaron Donald is one of the best players of all time, defensive players. But there's certain guys. Akeem Hicks is a guy people might not remember, but he was unblockable. Geno was unblockable. He's got the chance to be that. I don't know. I know Cowboy fans have been throwing up that one clip where he got triple teamed.
Yeah, I mean,
look, for these people who pick and choose these clips, like everybody, from Aaron Donald to Lawrence Taylor to Reggie White, there are plays where they got put on their ass because this is the NFL. Not often, and you usually got to double or triple team them, but it's all about balance and leverage and all that kind of stuff. These are all big, powerful people. When Jalen figures it out, gets some sort of veteran savvy, that's when you're going to see him really take off. But he's so gifted, I think he's going to be impactful as a rookie. And, that's the silver lining. Fletcher Cox's been out the past couple days with some knee soreness. So he's getting more reps with the first team. As you mentioned, Reddick's out with the thumb surgery. Smith's out with the shoulder. So he's even getting some reps outside. It all helps. But he's going to be a really good player. It's just a matter of how quickly he gets there.
Mentioning all these injuries, we're already beginning to see them pile up more than we have in comparison to last year's training camp.
We told you it was coming.
And, you're right. And obviously, this is something you can't really legislate. This is something you can't really account for, right? You can't control or try to dictate when injuries happen. There's a lot of luck involved. Not many teams have all 22 starters ready and available for the Super Bowl, right? So taking all of that into account, how much more important is roster depth this season? And how much pressure is on these young guys to really be able to show and prove how valuable and how impactful they can be, knowing that injury bug can hit you at any given time?
Well, it's always important. But I think the biggest thing is, and Doug Peterson used to talk about this a lot, is to not have multiple injuries at one position. That's when you really get banged up. So a lot of people are talking about backup quarterback. Look, you don't want the backup quarterback to play. It's like every other position. Lane Johnson. Actually, Jack Driscoll is that's a pretty good NFL backup, but that's a significant downgrade from Lane Johnson.
Right.
The Eagles have tremendous depth on the defensive front, as I talked about. But you don't want Nolan Smith playing because Hassan Reddick is hurt. And you sure as hell don't want Derek Barnett playing because Hassan Reddick and Nolan Smith are hurt. But it's great depth. So it kind of depends how you look at it. But yeah, I mean, the farther you go down, Marlon Tuipulotu is a good player who people may not realize, but and a lot of people talk about them bringing in Linval Joseph and Ndamukong Suh last year because Jordan Davis was hurt. Well, it was because Jordan Davis and Marlon Tuipulotu were hurt.
Right.
He was part of that as well. And then somebody like Kentavious Street, I say all the time, I can't find a spot for him. and he's a legit NFL player. Patrick Johnson is back. He's a legit NFL player. You might not have room for these guys, depending, I'm a little worried about Nolan Smith, though, with his shoulder.
Walk me through that, because he says something interesting, I believe, when you guys asked him about it. He says something along the lines of, it's just one of those things I don't think is ever going to be perfect or be right. Something like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, and he said it was related to his pec injury, which cost him, a lot of his last season at Georgia. And yeah, he's an undersized guy, and he's very honest, obviously, probably to the detriment. The Eagles probably didn't want him to be that honest, but he's like, yeah, this is a problem. And I'm like, oh yeah,
he'll learn.
Well, but he's telling the truth. It's a problem.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess you can't argue with the truth.
I mean, you can lie, but it's not going to make it not a problem. So that's why I'm a little bit concerned, because he said it's a problem. It's a problem. And he's not the biggest guy in the world. And if it is a problem, some of these offensive linemen are going to try to get their hands on him and, push that shoulder a little bit.
I know you're not a doctor, John, and the last thing I want from you is to pretend that you're a doctor, right? But you've covered this game for a while, and you've had the opportunity to interview a lot of players and players that have dealt with a plethora of injuries, right? In your humble experience covering the NFL, has there ever been any other player that you've covered, maybe on the defensive line or just on defense in general, that have dealt with nagging shoulder injuries? And if so, based off your conversations with them, what have they done to kind of try to alleviate that? Is it putting on more muscle, putting on more mass? Again, I know you're not a doctor, and I don't want you to pretend to be, but I really want to pick your brain about if you've heard or seen anything similar to this.
Well, I don't know the exact problem. I mean, not a defensive player, but a guy who's been going through it the last few years is Dalvin Cook, who played with a harness on his shoulder, and was a pretty good player with the harness. And he just got surgery this off season to try to make sure it doesn't separate anymore. Try to take care of it. But yeah, I mean, those kinds of things happen all the time. When you hear the word degenerative, it's interesting. We were just talking about Miles Jack. There were a lot. Miles Jack, if you go back and remember, a lot of people had him as a top 10 pick coming out of UCLA.
Right.
And he had a degenerative knee condition.
So did Josh Sweat, right, coming out of Florida State?
Well, Josh, a little bit different. Josh had a really, really difficult injury when he was a senior in high school, to the point they were almost had to amputate his leg. He was just even sort of like Teddy Bridgewater's injury, for people that remember that. That was really serious. But in Miles's case, this would have been his 8th year. So people are saying, well, he could only play maybe 2 or 3 years. That's why he dropped to, he went in the 30s. And he ended up playing 7 years, and he was fine. He played all the time. He was very durable. So, it's all a crapshoot. As much as doctors say, they look at things and they give their recommendations. And what the Eagles do, and I think they do, and this is the way you should do it, the Eagles generally make good decisions. I give them credit. When people say red flag, like DK Metcalf was an example of this, because people, the Eagles didn't take DK Metcalf. The Eagles red flag DK Metcalf. What that means is a lot of teams did, but and he's another guy who's an instance, and he's been fine. So there's an example where there were a lot of medical people around the league saying you can't take DK Metcalf at the top of the draft, and he's been fine. So they're not perfect either. there's no way of predicting this stuff. But when the Eagles red flag somebody, that means a lot of teams take people off their board, say, we're not drafting that kid. The Eagles say, we're not thinking about that particular player until day 3. So, if DK Metcalf would have gotten to day 3, they would have considered him. But, there's a cost benefit with some of these injury concerns. And, Nakobe Dean is another guy. I should have brought him up because he fell. Most people had Nakobe as a second-round pick from a talent standpoint. Some even had him as a bridge pick. Between the first and second round, obviously the Eagles aren't taking an off-ball linebacker in the first round, but and he had a degenerative shoulder condition, according to some teams, including the New York Giants, who admitted it in public. And that's why he fell a little bit. But the Eagles looked at him, it didn't red flag him, and took him in the third round. So, some doctors, not all doctors agree.
Before we jump to the offense side of the ball, final question on defense. Aside from obviously the injuries, that have been piling up, and aside from the inexperience on the defense side of the ball, what do you think is the largest concern? Oh, matter of fact, let me ask you like this. What concerns you the most when it comes to this 2023 Eagles team, aside from obviously the injury bug and the inexperience on the defensive side of the ball?
Say that again. What concerns me most about the team?
Yeah. So I guess I am kind of deviating from the defensive side of the ball. Because I want to bridge over to the offense, but what concerns you the most about this team aside from the defense side of the ball? Because the defense has been the talk of the town all offseason, right? The inexperience, a bunch of new faces on that side, the players they've lost. What concerns you the most about this team aside from the defense?
Depth on the offensive line.
Okay.
And age, because, as much as Jason Kelce is Jason Kelce, he's 35 years old. Talked about it with Tom Brady for years. Father Time gets everybody, and Jason's doing a good job of bending that off. Lane Johnson's 33. And Lane's been healthy, but Lane's had a lot of injuries. Luckily, that it seems that his reconstructive ankle surgery has cleaned that up, cleared that up. But, he's a 6'6", 325-pound guy, carrying a lot of weight. You see some of that. I saw Joe Thomas. Joe Thomas last week was in with the Browns, Hall of Fame left tackle, one of the best of all time. He's maybe 225, 230, a lot of guys tend to lose weight after their playing days because it's really difficult on their bodies. Brandon Brooks right here. Brandon played at 330. He went down to like 240 to rehab for his Achilles injury. And then went back up. He looked like a bodybuilder when he got down to about 240, 245. And I've seen it before. The last year of Doug Peterson, Andy Reid, we have multiple injuries on the offensive line. And you can't replace Lane. We've already seen it. The Eagles stink when Lane Johnson's off the field. They never lose. They never lose when he's on it. Obviously, I'm being facetious, but
right,
they win a lot.
The numbers stated.
Yeah.
They're significantly better when Lane Johnson is playing. It's really just that simple.
Yeah, they win a heck of a lot when he's on the field.
Right.
And there's no more Andre Dillard. Cam Jurgens was a great backup. Now he's a starter. and now your best backup is Jack Driscoll, and your probably second best backup is Tyler Steen as a rookie.
Mm-hmm.
And then where do you go from there? So Landon Dickerson has a history. He's got 2 torn ACLs
Yeah.
From his college days. Last year was banged up. This year he already got banged up with the foot. He got stepped on, so it's not serious. But they don't have the guys to replace those guys. And so if there's multiple injuries on the offensive line, that could derail a very good team.
Yeah, Mailata is another guy who's battled injury over the past couple of seasons. I think he had to deal with a shoulder last year, trying to make a tackle in that Jacksonville game. So, when you really go up and down his offensive line, as talented as all these guys are, when you really put it into perspective and really consider the history, it's just as well as things can go right for this team. Things can fall off the cliff rather quickly if you start to lose one too many of those guys on that line.
Yeah, and like I said, it's happened before.
Yeah, we've seen that 4-11-1. We've seen that.
One of the reasons, Nick Sirianni jokes about it with Shane Steichen coming in tomorrow. I mean, Shane Steichen, Jonathan Gannon, that's typically what you get when you're a first-time head coach. You go into a roster, in the case of Jonathan, it's maybe the worst roster in the NFL with the Arizona Cardinals, certainly in the conversation. In the case of Shane, I think their defense is pretty good, but other than Taylor, and obviously, they have a rookie quarterback who's got tremendous talent, but there's going to be some issues there. And Taylor wants to get traded now, so he's gotten permission to seek a trade. No, #no for Eagles fans. Not happening.
You already know Eagles fans so well, John.
Yeah.
they want everybody on the roster.
Yeah, #no. Costs too much money. Plus, you got to give up significant assets.
Mm-hmm.
You really think the Eagles are going to do that at that position? Ain't happening. So those are typically the situations you get as a first-time head coach. Nick came into a team with a really good offensive line that just was injured the year prior, and all of a sudden they got healthy.
Yeah.
And a really good defensive front. And that's usually the exact opposite of what you get when you take over a bad football team. The Eagles issue, they had to replace the skill position players, and they were able to do it. It's tough to replace those lines, and Nick knows he got lucky. He talks about it all the time.
Yeah, most coaches don't come in, with your trenches kind of pretty much ready made. Now, did they make little tweaks on the defensive side? Replacing Avery with Hassan Reddick, and replacing Eric Wilson with TJ Edwards, and replacing Singleton with Kaiser White. You know what I mean? They've had to mix and match a little bit.
But I'm not talking about linebackers. I'm talking about Fletcher and
No, you're right. No, you're right. You're right. There was
and,
definitely some foundational pieces there that he walked into that a lot of guys like Arthur Smith, right, that didn't really have a solid foundation in Atlanta. Even Robert
still
Saleh
doesn't.
Right. So staying on the offensive side of the ball for the Birds, right? Over these past couple of days of training camp, I'm hearing Jalen Hurts had one of his better days. And again, you and I are not really into the whole stat talk and training camp, but walk me through what you saw from Jalen Hurts, and were you impressed? Was it per usual? Just walk me through your observations of Jalen Hurts and how he conducted our offense over the past couple of days.
Well, he was rock solid on Sunday. The ball barely hit the ground, but Sunday to me was an AJ Brown day. I mean, AJ showed up, and
you mentioned in your article that him and Bradbury were kind of having a decent back and forth.
Oh, it was unbelievable. I mean, they were on the field closest to Patterson Avenue, which is the one we can get the closest to when we're watching practice. AJ, I think he caught the first 3 passes in team drills. Bang, bang, bang. And every single one of them, Bradbury was right there. I mean, it was the example. I hate that cliche. That's why I wrote about iron sharpening iron. But this was a perfect example of it. AJ, he had one of the most, all I could describe it as one of the most violent comeback routes I've ever seen. And what I mean by that, he put his foot in the ground and just ripped back to the football. Like, you know, he's a tremendous athlete and his size and it was just violent. And James was right there in his hip, but perfect throw, that body, caught the football. Similar on the next two plays, James was right there. And it was a perfect example of really good players helping themselves get better. So that stood out to me on Sunday. And yeah, when AJ wants to go, man, it's tough to stop.
Yeah, we saw it in that Titans game. You know, when he's highly motivated, he knows how to take it to you for sure. You know, it makes me think about, you know, AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, right? You know, the two staples in that wide receiver room. You know, I'm curious, you know, what do you think is the next step for these two guys? I mean, AJ Brown seems like he is in the stride of his prime right now. Devontae Smith, I personally don't think he's even reached his prime yet. I mean, he's only in his third year in the NFL, but, you know, it's just I watch these two guys play. I see how they conduct themselves at the position, how they conduct themselves as professionals, and just the pure talent, the pure skill, the technique they play the game with. The fact that they catch the ball with their hands, they're not body catchers, right? You know, what do you think is the next step for these two guys? Because AJ said he thinks he's getting faster. What do you think is the next step for these two guys as a tandem?
Yeah, he's gotten bigger, if that's possible as well. He's 26, AJ, and Devontae's 24.
Wow.
I mean, they're already the most talented duo the Eagles have ever had at the receiver position. Yeah, I mean, they might be the best duo in the NFL. They're in the conversation.
Right.
Certainly, you can talk about Hill and Waddle. There's a couple other ones, you know, Cincinnati with Chase and Higgins. I mean,
Right.
but they're in the conversation. I mean, they're just really good. And that's another, you know, depth issue. But when you have players like that, you can't have, you know, like earlier in the offseason, we'll go get DeAndre Hopkins. That's not how it works. I mean, and that's when you talk about health. They got to stay healthy, but if they stay healthy, they're really, really good. And if you lose one of them, you got to go down to Quez Watkins, Olamide Zaccheaus, who are solid players, but yeah, they're not AJ Brown or Devontae Smith. So it's a big part of it. Had that goofy, and I brought it up and I'm bringing it up again. I want to punch myself in the face for doing it. That goofy James Jones comparing Justin Fields to
I'm glad. I'm glad, but
Jalen Hurts. But my point is,
how can I put this, John, really quickly? I'm pleased and I'm angry you brought that up. I'll put it to you that way, because how low have we gotten that we're comparing? How lowly do we think of Jalen Hurts if we're comparing him to Justin Fields? And I don't mean any disrespect to Justin Fields, but I've seen him play. I've seen Jalen Hurts play. How lowly can we think of a guy to compare him to a guy in Chicago? Like, seriously, come on.
Well, it's not about Chicago. It's just about, you know, where Justin Fields is in his career. I think he's been hurt by being in Chicago because I think they have a bad organization, or have had. I know Ryan Poles trying to turn things around, and he tore it down to the studs. Yeah, I got to see that game last year. I was in Chicago. I mean, I joked about it at the time with my buddy Mike Kay. You know, you could time his processing skills with a sundial. I mean, he was afraid to throw the football. Now, part of that, and people bring it up, and Jody's a big Justin Fields fan, so he does. And I was actually a big Justin Fields fan coming out. And they did him a disservice for not building up around him last year. And who knows? I said, I think it was James Jones who said it.
Yeah,
On
former Green Bay
ESPN.
wide receiver.
Yeah,
Yep.
very good receiver. I don't know why it's so hard. There are a lot of players who are gifted physically. Justin Fields being one of them. Doesn't mean they're going to be good football players. He's very gifted physically, and that's what James was trying to say. He's probably got more raw talent than Jalen Hurts. That's fair to say, but he's not even close as a football player, and he'll probably never get close. And to compare the two right now is ludicrous. And then to blame him, he's got AJ Brown, he's got Devontae Smith.
I don't like that. I can't stand.
What do you want him to do? Say, oh no, don't. That's dumb to me. I mean, there's.
You're blaming a guy for having a competent GM.
Way too many NFL fans boil everything down to quarterback versus quarterback to begin with. And then they only want to talk about supporting cast. There's a lot of ways to win a football game. A lot of ways to win a football game. Kansas City, you could argue, won the Super Bowl with a special teams play. To be honest, that's where the game tilted. And people talk about, the defense and this and that. They won the game on that punt, to be honest. And then maybe, the ticky-tack pass interference call certainly hurt the Eagles. But, Bradbury admits it's a foul. I'm not going to argue with him, and he did. So anyway, yeah, I hesitate to bring it up, but the point of the supporting cast is, Jalen Hurts elevates people as well, especially the running game, by manipulating the spacing for the running backs and affecting the defense. And yeah, AJ and Devontae are great. But so was Jalen Hurts.
Right.
And
it's no accident they both had career years in the midst of him having a career year for himself.
Yeah, and I believe me, I think Eagles fans are over the top when people say, I'd rather have Joe Burrow, or I'd rather have Josh Allen, or I'd rather have Justin Herbert. Those are legitimate conversations. Those are great players. And you can make arguments for and against. Those are legitimate arguments. Justin Fields was one of the worst passing quarterbacks in the NFL last season. I mean, that one is a bridge too far. Maybe he improves. He's got a long way to go to even be in that conversation.
Especially being in Chicago. I mean, look, the fact of the matter is, you have some quarterbacks that come out of college and they have so much raw talent that some organizations believe that they can carry the organization, right? And then you got some guys who maybe weren't as highly touted. Maybe they don't have as many raw abilities. But if you put the pieces around them, they can make the most of it. Kind of like a guy like Jalen Hurts. I mean, Jalen Hurts is a talented quarterback. Let's not get it twisted. But, like you said, there are just some quarterbacks who just have these raw abilities. But that doesn't automatically make them a better quarterback.
Guess what? The most physically gifted quarterback in the NFL is going to be in Philadelphia tomorrow, and it's not Jalen Hurts. But nobody's talking about Anthony Richardson as the best quarterback in the NFL because it would be ludicrous to say that.
Right.
But just from a physical standpoint, he might be the most physically gifted quarterback that's ever arrived in this league. From a traits and measurable standpoint,
right?
If you look at, I'm just bringing up his pre-draft stuff. 6'4", 244, and he runs a 4.43 at that size with a 40.5 vertical leap and a 10.9 broad jump.
That's Cam Newton stuff. Like, geez.
10.5 hand, everything.
He was made
everything. from a physical standpoint, Anthony Richardson has. Not a better quarterback than Jalen Hurts or Joe Burrow or any of the young Trevor Lawrence. Throw him in there.
Right.
I mean, there's more to it.
Right.
And by the way, you bring up Cam Newton, who's tremendous. That's what I'm talking about. Tremendous physical gifts. Richardson blows him out of the water. That's the most gifted quarterback from a trait standpoint ever in the NFL. 244, 443.
He's gotten bigger. I heard he's put on more size, and it's ridiculous. Look, I always say, and we can put a button on this topic before we close the show. I mean, I always say, I don't care how far you can throw the ball. I don't care how much velocity you throw it with. The bottom line is, can you get the ball from point A to point B? Can you move the chains? Can you be efficient? Can you protect the ball? Can you make quick decisions?
Yeah,
can you not panic in the pocket? It's things you can't measure, is what I'm saying. So
I forget. Somebody brought up Pickens in Pittsburgh. I forget who it was, and said the same thing. He's more talented. He's more gifted than Justin Jefferson. He is not a better receiver. It works at every position. I mean, if it were as easy as just pick the most physically gifted guy, it'd be really easy to draft. It ain't that. Tom Brady's the best quarterback who ever lived. Aaron Rodgers is the best quarterback from a performance standpoint, from an arm talent standpoint. There's more to it than
we see Dan Marino, a guy who just couldn't get over the hump, and he had all the talent in the world.
Yeah, arm talent. But when we talk about the modern game and the guys who have movement skills and all that, Justin Fields is right there with Lamar Jackson as maybe the best running quarterback I've ever seen. And maybe Anthony Richardson joins them quickly. But from a processing standpoint, Justin Fields has got a long, long way to go. He was so slow getting his, making his decisions, seeing him live. And Jalen has become, he likes to call himself a triple threat because he takes more pride in that than his physical skills. They're not even the same stratosphere.
On that note, John, let's begin to close this show out. So can you walk us through what you may have coming up for JAKIBsports.com and SI.com from a project standpoint? And also, can you walk us through what's next for the Philadelphia Eagles on their training camp schedule?
Well, next is Shane Steichen coming in tomorrow morning for joint practice. Only one joint practice in advance of the game on Thursday. Yeah, good to see Shane. Good guy, tremendous offensive coordinator for this team. Obviously, that's why he got a head coaching job. And some controversy with the Jonathan Taylor stuff. And now he's coming here, who uncertainty at running back. So I'm going to have to deal with that nonsense over the next 24 hours. #no. Keep it going. Tone DeShields.
I got you.
Jonathan Taylor is not coming here.
I'm not interested, you guys. Just let you. I'm not interested.
He is going to cost significant, not only money but also assets to acquire him. And obviously, we know how the Eagles feel about the running back position. Not that he's not a great player. Not that he couldn't help the Eagles. He's one of the best running backs in football. That's just not the way they do business. But yeah. So that is the big news coming up tomorrow. Cut down day a week from tomorrow. All of that. Working on the James Bradbury, getting slot reps, which was interesting. Sean Desai throws everything at the wall. So I give him credit. I do give Sean Desai credit for that because, I think a lot of people, I was looking this up today because of Bradbury. Same thing with Reddick last year. Dropping into coverage, you would hear the fans say, "You can't drop Hassan Reddick into coverage." He drops into coverage every year, multiple times. James Bradbury has played in the slot. I think the number was 35 times a year, 7 seasons. So, that's not a lot.
It's really not in the grand scheme of things. It's like an average of 2 times per game.
But defensive football is not rigid. It's weighted. If you're an outside corner, the vast majority of the time you're going to play outside. But there are times, as Jim Schwartz says, defense is reactionary. Sometimes they're going to force you to go in the slot, and you're going to play in the slot. So I give Sean Desai some credit. Why not throw a rep out there or two and get ready for it?
There you have it, you guys. You guys have been locked in on Football 24/7 with John McMullen, and I'm your guy, Tone DeShields II. Please smash that like button. Make sure you guys are always subscribed to the JAKIB Sports YouTube channel. You guys don't want to miss some of the best sports content out there on the market, in the Philadelphia market, in the tri-state. We're giving you guys so much great content. On top of that, it doesn't matter where you are, really. If you're an Eagles fan across the country, if you're in New Zealand, if you're in Africa, wherever you are, you can lock in on JAKIB Sports and JAKIBsports.com. And also you can lock in on John McMullen on JAKIBsports.com and on SI.com as well. Again, smash that like button, stay engaged. Make sure you check John McMullen out, and also his right-hand man, Jody Mack, on Birds 365 at 8 a.m. Eastern time. Also check out Derek Gunn and Rob Ellis on Sports Take at 12 p.m. Eastern time. And then you can check out the man, the myth, the legend, Dan Cilio on the National Football Show at 3 p.m. Eastern time. We got you guys stacked. Again, this is Football 24/7. He's John McMullen. I'm your guy, Tone DeShields II, and we're out here, you guys. Take care.